going on, everyone? So, reports are still coming out that both Zach LaVine as well as Brandon Ingram don't really have a market. Teams aren't really lining up to go trade for them. More likely than not, both teams are going to have to keep them. There were reports that both teams have basically accepted that they're probably going to have to keep them. Chances are they're going to lose Brandon Ingram from nothing. If you're the New Orleans Pelicans, Zach LaVine, you still have a couple years. The hope from Chicago's side is that they can keep Zach, hopefully raise his trade value, raise his stock, and then maybe at the trade deadline, they can end up moving him. The hope is for the Pelicans, Brandon Ingram being an expiring contract, maybe they could work something out closer to the trade deadline in order to unload them. Both players are excellent players. Zach LaVine, I think, is the better natural plug-and-play player for most teams, but both players kind of have their flaws, right? Both players are very injury prone. Both players are going to make 40 plus million a year because Brandon Ingram wants that new max contract. So how many teams are lining up to go and trade for these guys? Also, how many teams need guys like that? Now, as far as Brandon Ingram goes, it does look like Utah is potentially interested in trading for Brandon Ingram. Based on the reports, the Pelicans would have to include a Walker Kessler. But, I mean, if you're Utah, you're probably looking at it as like, we don't really have to do anything, right? Like, we're doing you a favor type thing. So, are they able to work out some type of trade, some type of deal? It's one of those things, I'd believe it when I see it, right? Is Brandon Ingram really what the Pelicans or the Utah Jazz want? Are you really trading for him and then going and giving him a max contract? And now Brandon Ingram and Lauri Markkanen, who again, both guys are incredibly injury prone. Neither guy really is a number one, arguably a number two. Those are going to be your two guys leading the franchise going forward. I don't really buy it. Now, maybe Utah's looking at it as like, hey, we could unload a bunch, John Collins and Collins Sexton. Like, we can unload some of these guys, get off of some of that money. That could be a possibility. That could be something that they look to do. But nonetheless, right? Like, I don't hate the Lakers. Well, I am on team go get Zach LaVine. I've been on teams go get Zach LaVine since last trade deadline. Right? Like, I want to see the Lakers go get LaVine. I think LaVine solves your third consistent scoring athletic guard, right? He gives you he's one of the best catch and shoot three-point shooters in the league. He's a guy that can absolutely go get a bucket, gives you that athleticism. People talk like he's this atrocious defender. He's actually not that bad. And when he's locked in and engaged, he's actually good, right? And him not having to be one of the primary offensive weapons, he may buy in on the defensive side even more. Not just that, but there's the potential that you could get some other assets. Even if it is a second round pick or two, that still has value. That's still things that you could add to a potential trade. But more than anything, you get to keep everything, right? So not only do you get a bona fide third guy who would complement and fit alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis beautifully, you also get, he arguably be the best like third option in the league, right? As far as like fit versus talent goes. But you also get to keep your assets, which then you can use to now go get a Wendell Carter Jr. or maybe like a Nick Richards, or maybe you're going and getting, one of these other guys, right? Like, it gives you options. Walker Kessler would be great, to where you can now go still make that other move, right? And still maintain your depth, still maintain your roster. You'd also free up the roster spots that you want to free up to kind of bring in guys. I don't think it's a terrible idea. I don't. I think, it gives you that significant upgrade in firepower, right? Like, why did Sacramento go and get DeMar DeRozan? They didn't need another isolation scorer, right? But they're looking at it as like the West is kind of this arms race, and it's going to be like who can score the most consistently. Well, go get Zach LaVine, right? It fits that standard, right? You see all these teams loading up to try to just improve, and Zach LaVine would be a guy that would improve you greatly, in my opinion. I am very high on Zach LaVine, but the Lakers haven't really even seemed to entertain the idea. Now, maybe the Lakers are kind of looking at it as like, hey, that's always going to be there, right? Like if you know something is going to be there, you're not really worried about it, right? And it's one of those things like if somebody else gets him, then it's not the end of the world type thing. So the Lakers could just be looking at it as like worst case scenario, that'll be the move that we make. But right now, let's go look to see if we can go get a Grant and Bruce Brown, or a Grant and a Walker, or whatever, Cam Johnson, and is that something that they're looking at, like to where LaVine's always going to be there, right? So we don't need to. It's not a pressing matter to where we have to go do that now. That could always be an option because the Lakers were interested in him at the trade deadline, and then they kind of decided to go the other way, and then there were the reports of Detroit putting their hat in the ring, and Zach LaVine was kind of like, I'm not going to Detroit, right? But from the other side, with a Brandon Ingram, again, I don't hate the idea of Brandon Ingram. I think, again, you're looking at a guy that would be incredibly cheap to obtain. I don't think the Lakers would have to sell the farm to go get Brandon Ingram. It's kind of like you're going to lose him anyway. So wouldn't you rather get something rather than nothing, right? And there's the risk of like, hey, he's injury prone and he wants to get paid fat. To me, with Brandon Ingram, I look at it two ways. I look at it, one, you go and acquire him. He'd immediately be your third best player. If the fit is good, then you could re-sign him. Maybe you can convince him to take less than the $40 million. Because if I'm if I was the Lakers and I was to go trade for him, go ahead, right? Like if you want to walk, and you think you can get more money elsewhere, go, right? And that's kind of the other side of the coin for this. You could use Brandon Ingram as a hard reset, right? To where you're unloading. Say you give up Rui and like Gabe Vincent, right? Plus whatever filler, all that, right? But let's say it's a package around that, right? And you give up those two guys to go and then land Brandon Ingram. Again, you'd have to get more salary because that's only like that's $28 million or something. So maybe there's a third piece, right? Maybe you're throwing in a deal or whatever, right? Maybe you're stacking a couple guys. However, right? But say you can unload. The reason I'm mentioning those two guys is because they have salary, right? They have another year beyond this year, right? So maybe you look at it as like we can get off of their salary, bring in Brandon Ingram. If he's great, maybe we can sign him for $30 million a year, right? Now that's much more reasonable, and now we have a position to where we can go get other guys. LeBron could always restructure his contract, right? D'Lo's money could fall off the books. You could be in good shape in that regard, right? Assuming you don't trade D'Lo in the trade, right? But nonetheless, right, if the other side of that is you go get him, you clear off that salary, and if Brandon Ingram walks, you just cleared off $30 million or $36 million in salary or however much he's making, right? Like you just cleared off a bunch of salary. Again, LeBron could restructure his contract if you don't trade D'Lo, or if you do trade D'Lo, whatever, right? Like, point is, like, you'd have a bunch of money fall off the books to where you could go get several other guys and kind of revamp this roster, kind of restructure this roster if you wanted to. It's kind of one of those things where, I think Brandon Ingram, if you can, to me, it's can you get him at the right price, right? Because then it could kind of be a win-win, right? And if I'm the Lakers, hey, you want to go look, go ahead. Who's giving Brandon Ingram $40+ million a year? Nobody's doing that, right? So to me, if I'm the Lakers, I'd take my chance. If he walks, so be it. But that's why I think you have to get him at a good price, right? Because if you have to give up a first or two firsts or anything like that, then nah, just keep him. But if you can get him essentially they're just like, hey, we just want players that can help, right? Like, okay, then center a package around that. Like, we want to get something. We don't want to just lose Ingram for nothing. So even if we get a Rui or something like that's worth it, right? Sure. Do something like that, or maybe you're working out some 3-team trade, whatever. As long as you don't have to give up a bunch of your assets. That's why I like the idea of Zach LaVine. The way I'm looking at it is, can you get either of those two guys without selling the farm to where you still have flexibility to go make other moves, do other deals? If you can, then that would be great. But the thing about Zach LaVine is it's his long-term money, and if it doesn't work or he can't stay healthy or whatever, you're kind of stuck. Where with Brandon Ingram, you just let him walk. You just say, hey, man, sorry, it didn't work out. Good luck to you. And you just kind of let him go do his thing. So there is this risk reward for Zach LaVine that there isn't for Ingram. Now, I think Zach LaVine would be the better fit. I think he'd be the better natural fit. But I do think you can make Ingram work. Right? I do think he also kind of fits what the Lakers are looking for as far as just like that go-to bucket getter and scorer. Again, I'd probably prefer Zach LaVine. It's just me personally. But I don't hate the idea of Brandon Ingram because either way you win. Either A, it gives you a bunch of flexibility to where you can go bring in a couple guys next season, and there's even potentially a couple stars, right? Kyrie Irving could potentially, right? Don't want to start that yet, but just throwing that out there. But take that as you may, right? Comment away. But, and then if it does work out, then you could just re-sign him to a reasonable deal, right? I still wouldn't sign him to $40 million, but be like, hey, man, like we'll give you $30 million, right? Give you 4 years, $120 million, or maybe it's a smaller deal, right? Maybe he's like, let me try to use the Lakers to kind of rebrand my image. So, because he is still young enough to where maybe you sign him to a 2-year, $60 million to kind of line him up with LeBron and AD type thing, right? And then it's like, hey, good luck to you after this is all done. It's always a possibility. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. Pass a question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Do you think the Lakers could benefit and capitalize on the lack of markets for Zach LaVine as well as Brandon Ingram? Do you think no, stay away from both? Would you prefer one? Are you like Team LaVine? Are you Team Brandon Ingram? Again, I'm Team LaVine. Get me Zach LaVine and let's go win a chip is my opinion. As long as everyone's healthy, we're good. And I know a lot of people worry about Zach LaVine's health. I mean, outside of last year, which he was supposed to finish the season until the Detroit Pistons talks happened, and then he was like, I'm not going to Detroit, and all of a sudden he had surgery. Even Chicago was like, wait, he needs surgery? Nobody knew he needed surgery, right? So I think that was more of we're good type thing. So I think that's a little overblown. You look at the previous seasons, he played 77 games, 67 games, right? As long as he gives you 60 to 65 games, you're good, right? Getting to the playoffs, healthy in the playoffs, you're winning chips, right? So it's kind of where I'm at with that. But again, I would prefer Zach LaVine. I just think Brandon Ingram would give you more flexibility. I think he'd also potentially be cheaper long term because I just don't see anybody giving him $40+ million. If I'm the Lakers, go ahead, go shop around, sure, right? Good luck to you. Hey, we might not have a contract for you when you get back. Just letting you know that, right? Because we're not just gonna wait for you. Go do some other things, right? And if we'll sign you to what we can if you do want to come back, right? So anyway, again, how you feel, what your thoughts are? Love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. So we enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.